A few weeks had passed since the pool party that turned Jake's ranch into a local legend. Life on the property had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt warmer and more connected than ever before. The initial buzz of social media posts and news coverage had died down, but the impact lingered in ways Jake hadn't anticipated. His ranch was no longer just his private sanctuary. It had become a gathering spot for neighbors, friends, and even strangers who wanted to share in the spirit of community he'd unintentionally sparked every weekend. People showed up unannounced, bringing coolers full of drinks, homemade dishes, and stories to tell. Some came to swim, others to sit by the fire pit under the stars. Kids ran around barefoot, chasing each other with water guns while adults laughed over beers and shared tales of their own run-ins with HOAs or overly controlling neighbors. It was like the ranch had transformed into a hub of connection where everyone felt welcome and accepted. Jake loved it. He wasn't much of a planner, so these spontaneous gatherings suited him perfectly. He'd learned quickly that hosting didn't mean doing everything himself. Neighbors pitched in without being asked. Someone always brought extra chairs. Another person hauled out a portable speaker, and someone else volunteered to man the grill. It was as if the whole thing had taken on a life of its own, growing organically with each passing week. The deputies who'd attended the first pool party became regular visitors, too. They weren't there in an official capacity anymore. They came because they enjoyed the atmosphere, the food, and the chance to unwind after long shifts. Sometimes they brought colleagues along, introducing them to Jake and the rest of the group. Other times, they rolled up their sleeves and helped clean up after the crowd left, proving that even law enforcement officers could be part of the community in meaningful ways. One Friday evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake found himself sitting by the pool with Deputy Rodriguez, the taller officer who'd been among the first to visit. A gentle breeze carried the scent of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass, and the sound of laughter filled the air. "You know," Rodriguez said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been thinking about this place a lot lately. It's kind of amazing how something as simple as a pool can bring people together." Jake nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "Yeah, I never expected any of this when I bought it. Figured it'd just be me floating around out here on lazy afternoons." Rodriguez chuckled. "Well, turns out you're better at throwing parties than you thought. You should consider running for mayor or something." Jake laughed, waving off the suggestion. "Nah, I'm happy right where I am. No politics for me." But seriously, I think what makes this work is that nobody's trying to control anything. People come here because they want to, not because they have to. There's no agenda, no rules, just good vibes. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. That's rare these days. Most places feel like they're micromanaged to death. It's refreshing to see something different. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, upcoming holidays, favorite fishing spots, and whether the local football team stood a chance this season. As they talked, Jake glanced around at the scene unfolding around them. Kids splashed in the pool, shrieking with delight as someone launched a massive cannonball. Adults lounged in lawn chairs, chatting and laughing like old friends. Even the dogs seemed to be having a blast, chasing each other through the grass with wagging tails. It struck Jake then how much had changed since Karen's initial complaint. Back then, he'd been frustrated, maybe even a little worried about what might happen. Now, looking at the joy surrounding him, he realized how small her grievances seemed in comparison. All she'd cared about were rules and control, but none of that mattered here. What mattered was connection, the shared moments, the laughter, the sense of belonging. Speaking of Karen, she hadn't been seen in weeks. Rumors circulated that she'd packed up and moved away, unable to face the constant jokes and ridicule. Whether that was true or not, Jake didn't know, and honestly, he didn't care. Her absence had created space for something far greater. A community united by kindness and fun rather than division and fear. As the night wore on, Jake decided to address the crowd. Standing up, he clinked his bottle against a nearby metal chair to get everyone's attention. Conversations quieted and faces turned toward him, curious about what he had to say. "Hey, y'all," Jake began, his voice warm and genuine. "Just wanted to take a minute to thank you all for making this place so special. When I put in this pool, I never imagined it would turn into, well, whatever this is." He gestured around at the smiling faces. "All I wanted was a little slice of peace and quiet. Instead, I got all of you, and I couldn't be happier about it." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, some whistling loudly enough to startle the dogs. Jake grinned, raising his bottle in a toast. "Here's to good company, good memories, and plenty more nights like this one. Cheers! Cheers!" Everyone echoed, raising their drinks in unison. Afterward, the party continued late into the night. Someone started a bonfire, and soon marshmallows were roasting over the flames. Stories flowed freely, from hilarious childhood antics to heartfelt reflections on the importance of community. By the time the last guest left, the ranch was quiet again, but the warmth of the evening lingered in Jake's heart. In the days and weeks that followed, Jake kept thinking about what made this place so magical. It wasn't the pool itself, though that certainly helped. It wasn't the food or the music either. What made it special was the people, their willingness to embrace each other, flaws and all, and create something beautiful together. Karen's shadow still loomed faintly in the background, a reminder of how easily negativity could creep in. But Jake knew now that it couldn't thrive unless given room to grow. And on his ranch, there was no room for bitterness or control. Only joy, laughter, and the simple pleasure of knowing you belonged. As summer faded into fall, Jake continued hosting gatherings, each one bigger and better than the last. The pool remained the centerpiece, but it was clear that its significance went beyond water and plastic walls. It represented resilience, defiance against unnecessary restrictions, and above all, the power of human connection. And every time Jake dove in, feeling the cool water rush over him, he smiled. Not because of the pool itself, but because of everything it had brought into his life. In the heart of a bustling city filled with skyscrapers that seemed to touch the clouds, there lived a woman who had become an icon in her own right. She wasn't just any woman, she was someone people looked up to, not just because of her achievements, but also because of how far she'd come. Her name wasn't important here. What mattered was her story. And oh, what a story it was. This woman had built herself from scratch. Born into a modest family where opportunities were scarce, she learned early on that if she wanted something, she'd have to work for it harder than anyone else. Growing up, she saw challenges everywhere: financial struggles, societal expectations, and even whispers from those who doubted her dreams could ever come true. But none of that stopped her. Instead, it fueled her fire. By the time she reached adulthood, she knew exactly what she wanted to make a difference. Not just for herself, but for others too. Her big break came when she founded a tech company focused on sustainable energy solutions. Think about it: clean energy that didn't harm the planet. Technology designed to help communities thrive without costing them the earth, literally. It was bold, innovative, and exactly what the world needed. People started taking notice. Investors poured in, partnerships grew, and soon enough, her little startup transformed into a billion-dollar enterprise. Overnight, she went from being that girl with big ideas to one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the industry. But success didn't change her. Sure, she wore designer suits now and attended high-profile meetings, but deep down, she remained the same person who believed in fairness, hard work, and kindness. That's why this next chapter of her life hit so hard it reminded her everything she thought she'd left behind. One sunny morning, she found herself standing outside a massive bank building. This wasn't just any bank. It was Global Capital Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the world. Today was supposed to be monumental. After months of negotiations, she was finalizing a $2 billion partnership, a deal that would take her company to new heights. Imagine the possibilities. Funding for research, expansion into underserved areas, jobs created, lives changed. The weight of it all made her heart race with excitement. She walked through the revolving doors, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Around her, the air buzzed with Activity Bank employees rushing around, customers waiting. In line, the faint hum of conversations blending together. She adjusted her blazer, feeling confident and ready. Everything about her screamed professionalism, the way she carried herself, the calm yet determined look in her eyes, the neatly organized folder tucked under her arm. She belonged here, no question about it. As she approached the counter, she noticed the teller stationed there. He was young, probably fresh out of college, scrolling lazily through his phone. His posture screamed boredom, like he couldn't wait to clock out for the day. When she stepped up to the counter, he barely glanced at her before asking, "Can I help you?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady and polite. "I'm here to finalize some paperwork for a business transaction." With that, she handed over her identification, a driver's license and a corporate ID card, as well as the documents she'd prepared. Simple enough, right? Just another routine process. But then, something happened that froze her in place. Something small, almost insignificant, yet utterly devastating. The teller picked up her IDs, holding them between two fingers as though they were dirty. For a split second, their eyes met and she saw it, disdain. Pure, unfiltered disdain. Then, without saying a word, he dropped her ID onto the floor behind the counter. "You can pick it up when you're done," he muttered, already turning back to his phone as if nothing had happened. The room seemed to stop spinning. Time slowed down. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Humiliation washed over her like a tidal wave. Here she was, a CEO, a leader, a trailblazer, and this man, this stranger, had treated her like she was nothing, like she didn't matter. For a moment, she considered walking away, turning around, leaving the bank, and never looking back. But something inside her refused to let him win, refused to let this moment define her. So she bent down, retrieved her ID, and stood back up, her spine straight and her head held high. In that instant, she realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than her. Much bigger. And that's when she decided, whatever happened next, this partnership was over. The moment she stood back up, holding her ID tightly in her hand, the atmosphere in the bank seemed to shift. It wasn't just her who noticed what had happened, others did too. A few customers nearby exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others whispered quietly among themselves. One older woman sitting on a bench near the counter leaned forward, her lips pressed into a thin line, clearly disapproving of the teller's behavior, but no one spoke up. No one said anything to defend her or call out the disrespect. And that silence, it stung almost as much as the act itself. Because in that moment, she realized something painful. This wasn't just about one person's actions. This was about a culture, an environment where such behavior could happen without consequence. Where someone like her, a successful, accomplished woman, could walk into a place like this and still be treated as less than. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Her mind raced with thoughts, emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Anger, yes, but also sadness, disappointment, frustration, She'd faced plenty of obstacles in her life, especially as a black woman climbing the ladder in industries dominated by people who didn't look like her. There were times when she'd been talked over in meetings, dismissed during pitches, or underestimated simply because of how she looked. But this? Dropping her idea on the floor like it was trash? That crossed a line she hadn't expected. Still, she refused to let him see her crack. Instead, she squared her shoulders, looked the teller straight in the eye, and said, "I think we're done here." Her voice was steady, firm, leaving no room for argument. The teller finally looked up from his phone, startled, as if he hadn't expected her to say anything at all. Maybe he thought she'd just take the insult and move on. But she wasn't going anywhere, not until she made sure everyone knew exactly what had happened. With that, she turned around and walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the storm brewing inside her. Every step felt heavier than the last, each click of her heels echoing through the now eerily quiet bank. People watched her leave, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with guilt. She could feel their stares burning into her back, but she didn't care. What mattered most was getting out of there before she lost control of her emotions entirely. Outside, the fresh air hit her like a wave, sharp and grounding. She stopped for a moment, closing her eyes and letting the cool breeze wash over her face. For the first time since stepping foot into that bank, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to process what had just happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her folder, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just a personal attack, it was a professional one. A slap in the face to everything she'd worked so hard to achieve, and yet, even in the midst of her anger and hurt, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was bigger than her. Bigger than the bank, the partnership, or even the money involved. This was about respect, about dignity, about standing up for what was right, even when it meant walking away from something monumental. By the time she reached her car, parked a block away, her phone was already buzzing nonstop. Notifications poured in one after another, lighting up her screen. At first, she ignored them, unsure of what they could possibly be about. But curiosity got the better of her, and she unlocked her phone to see what was happening. That's when she saw it: videos. Dozens of them, uploaded online by witnesses who had captured parts of the encounter inside the bank. Some clips showed the teller dropping her ID onto the floor, his expression smug and dismissive. Others zoomed in on her face as she bent down to pick it up, capturing the mix of shock and determination etched across her features. Comments flooded the posts, people expressing outrage, support, and disbelief. Hashtags began trending almost instantly. Hashtag respect black women CEOs. Hashtag stand for equality. Hashtag justice for her. Strangers shared their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment, tagging her in hopes of finding solidarity. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story, turning it into headlines across the country. Reporters called her nonstop, asking for statements, interviews, reactions. Social media exploded with debates about racism, corporate accountability, and the treatment of women in positions of power. Everyone wanted to know, who was this woman? What would she do next? Back at the bank, chaos erupted. Managers scrambled to contain the fallout, calling emergency meetings and drafting press releases. Security footage was reviewed, employees questioned, and disciplinary actions threatened. By late afternoon, the bank issued a public apology, claiming they were deeply sorry for the incident and promising to investigate further. They announced that the teller responsible had been fired immediately, an attempt to show they were taking the matter seriously. But the apology rang hollow. To anyone paying attention, it was clear this wasn't just about one bad employee. This was about a system that allowed such behavior to exist unchecked. People pointed out that firing the teller wasn't enough. It didn't address the root of the problem. How many other incidents like this had gone unreported? How many more women and minorities had been treated poorly in similar situations? For her part, she stayed silent for now. She needed time to think, to decide how best to respond. This wasn't just about revenge or punishment. It was about sending a message. A loud, clear message that discrimination and disrespect wouldn't be tolerated, not in her presence, not in her industry, and certainly not in her future. As night fell, she sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled below, a reminder of the world she'd fought so hard to be a part of. Yet tonight, those lights felt distant, almost unreachable. She thought about the partnership, the $2 billion deal that could have changed everything. She thought about the people counting on her, the community she'd hoped to help. And she thought about the young woman she used to be, standing in front of a mirror practicing speeches, dreaming of a day when she'd prove everyone wrong. That dream hadn't died. If anything, it burned brighter than ever. But proving people wrong wasn't enough anymore. Now it was about paving the way for others. For every woman, every minority, every underrepresented voice that deserved to be heard. With newfound resolve, she opened her laptop and began typing. Words flowed effortlessly onto the screen, each sentence carrying the weight of her experience, her pain, and her hope for change. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from purpose. From strength. Tomorrow, the world would hear her voice, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the world woke up to her statement. It was everywhere: news websites, social media feeds, talk shows. The words she had typed late into the night weren't just a response to what had happened. They were a declaration, a call to action. She didn't mince words. She explained exactly how she felt, not just about the incident itself, but about the larger issues it represented. This isn't about one person or one act, she wrote. It's about the environment that allows such behavior to happen without consequence. Until there is meaningful change, I cannot align myself with any organization that fails to value respect and equality. Her statement wasn't angry, it was calm, measured, and powerful. It resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. Some saw themselves in her story, remembering moments when they too had been dismissed or treated unfairly because of who they were. Others admired her courage, her refusal to stay silent even when walking away meant losing billions. For many, her words became a rallying cry, a reminder that standing up for what's right is always worth it, no matter the cost. As the day went on, the fallout grew. Global Capital Bank tried desperately to control the narrative, issuing more apologies and promising reforms. They announced plans to implement diversity training programs, hire consultants to review their workplace culture, and create new policies aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future, but none of it seemed genuine. To most people, these moves came across as damage control, not real change. And honestly, could anyone blame them for being skeptical? After all, if the bank truly cared about equality and respect, this kind of thing wouldn't have happened in the first place. Meanwhile, other companies started distancing themselves from global capital. Business partners who once valued their relationship with the bank began reevaluating their ties. Investors grew nervous, watching the stock prices plummet as public trust eroded. Employees within the bank spoke out anonymously, sharing stories of toxic work environments, discrimination, and systemic bias. What had started as a single incident quickly spiraled into a full-blown crisis for one of the largest financial institutions in the world. For her part, she stayed focused. This wasn't about revenge or dragging the bank through the mud. It was about accountability. about making sure something like this never happened again. She knew that simply cutting ties with global capital wasn't enough. If she really wanted to make a difference, she needed to do more, much more. So she turned her attention inward. Over the next few weeks, she poured her energy into launching a new initiative called Equity Forward. The goal was simple yet ambitious: to promote diversity and inclusion within corporate America. Through Equity Forward, she partnered with trailblazing leaders from underrepresented communities, women, minorities, immigrants, and others who had faced barriers in their careers. Together, they created mentorship programs to guide young professionals, advocacy campaigns to challenge discriminatory practices, and funding opportunities to support entrepreneurs who might otherwise struggle to get their foot in the door. Spread fast. People rallied behind her cause, donating money, volunteering their time, and spreading awareness. Schools reached out, asking her to speak to students about perseverance and leadership. Nonprofits invited her to collaborate on projects aimed at empowering marginalized groups. Even competitors in her industry tipped their hats, acknowledging the importance of her work. In a short amount of time, Equity Forward became more than just an initiative. It became a movement. But while she dedicated herself to creating change, she also had to figure out what came next for her company. Losing the $2 billion partnership with global capital was a blow, no question about it. That kind of funding would have accelerated her goals, allowing her to expand faster and reach more people sooner. Without it, she'd have to rethink her strategy. Scaling back wasn't an option. There were too many lives depending on her success. So instead, she got creative. She reached out to smaller investment firms, ones that shared her values and vision for the future. One name kept coming up: Ethos Green Fund. Unlike global capital, Ethos was known for its commitment to sustainability and social justice. They believed in using business as a force for good, investing in projects that prioritized people and the planet over profits alone. At first glance, they seemed like the perfect fit, but there was a catch. Their resources were limited compared to global capital's. Partnering with them wouldn't bring in the same kind of money, which meant scaling her operations more slowly than she'd originally planned. Still, she didn't hesitate. After meeting with Ethos's leadership team, she knew she'd found allies who genuinely understood her mission. Together, they crafted a deal that, while smaller, aligned perfectly with her principles. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about building something sustainable, something that reflected the kind of world she wanted to live in. As the ink dried on the new agreement, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Yes, the road ahead would be tougher now. Yes, she'd have to work twice as hard to achieve the same results. But she also knew that every step she took moving forward would be rooted in integrity. And that, to her, was worth far more than any amount of money. In the months that followed, she threw herself into her work with renewed passion. Her team noticed the shift immediately. Meetings became brainstorming sessions filled with ideas for innovation. Deadlines turned into milestones celebrated together. Morale soared as everyone rallied around a shared purpose, proving that success and ethics could go hand in hand. Outside the office, her influence continued to grow. People looked to her not just as a CEO, but as a role model. Young girls wrote letters thanking her for inspiring them to dream bigger. Community leaders praised her for giving a voice to those who often went unheard. Even critics softened their stance, admitting that her actions had sparked important conversations about race, gender, and power dynamics in the workplace. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were days when doubt crept in, when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. On those days, she reminded herself why she started this journey in the first place. She thought about the communities counting on her, the families relying on affordable green technology to improve their lives. She thought about the little girl she used to be, staring at the stars and daring to believe she could change the world. And then she rolled up her sleeves and got back to work. Because for her, this wasn't just a career, it was a calling. A chance to leave the world better than she found it. And nothing, not a dismissive teller, not a broken partnership, not even fear itself, was going to stop her from seeing it through. Years later, when people talked about her story, they didn't just focus on the incident at the bank or the $2 billion partnership she walked away from. They spoke about what came after, the ripple effect of her decision, the lives it touched, and the lasting change it sparked. It wasn't just a tale of one woman standing up for herself. It was a testament to the power of resilience, integrity, and courage. Her journey became a blueprint for others, a reminder that sometimes walking away is the bravest step forward. The bank, meanwhile, never fully recovered its reputation. Despite their public apologies and promises of reform, skepticism lingered. People remembered how quickly they tried to sweep the incident under the rug, firing the teller as if that single action could erase years of systemic issues. Employees within the organization continued to speak out anonymously, sharing stories of discrimination and toxic work environments. Investors remained wary, and stock prices struggled to rebound. The once mighty institution served as a cautionary tale, a stark example of what happens when an organization fails to prioritize respect and accountability. For her, the fallout at the bank was proof that standing up for what's right isn't just a personal choice, it's a societal responsibility. She often reflected on how the silence in that moment had spoken louder than any words ever could. When the teller dropped her ID onto the floor, he hadn't just disrespected her. He'd revealed the cracks in a system that needed fixing. And by choosing to walk away, she forced the world to take notice. Her company, Lumina Tech, flourished in ways no one could have predicted. Though the smaller partnership with Ethos Green Fund meant slower growth initially, it also allowed them to stay true to their values. Every project they launched was rooted in purpose-serving communities, protecting the planet, and empowering people who had been overlooked for too long. Their solar panels brought light to villages that had spent generations in darkness. Their water purification systems gave families access to clean drinking water, transforming health outcomes in regions plagued by disease. With each success, they proved that profit and impact weren't mutually exclusive, they could coexist, creating a better future for everyone. But it wasn't just about the technology. It was about the message behind it. Through Equity Forward, she inspired a new generation of leaders to challenge the status quo. Young entrepreneurs learned to dream bigger, knowing there were mentors and resources available to help them succeed. Women and minorities found strength in her example, realizing that their voices mattered and that they didn't have to shrink themselves to fit into spaces not designed for them. Even corporate giants took note, reevaluating their own practices and making strides toward inclusivity, some genuinely, others as a response to growing pressure. Her influence extended beyond boardrooms and business deals. She became a voice for those who felt voiceless, using her platform to advocate for policies that promoted equality and justice. Lawmakers sought her input on legislation aimed at closing the racial wealth gap and supporting minority-owned businesses. Schools named scholarships after her, ensuring that students from underserved backgrounds had opportunities to pursue education and careers in STEM fields. Communities celebrated her contributions, recognizing her not just as a leader, but as a neighbor who cared deeply about the world around her. Still, she never lost sight of where she came from or who she was. Fame didn't change her. If anything, it grounded her even more. She remained humble, always quick to credit her team for their hard work and dedication. During interviews, she often left off questions about her overnight success, reminding people that overnight success didn't exist. Behind every headline was years of struggle, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. Success wasn't handed to her, it was earned. One step at a time. As the years went by, she began to think more about legacy. Not the kind measured in dollars or awards, but the kind that lives on in hearts and minds. What would people remember about her when she was gone? Would they recall the products her company created or the way she made them feel? Would they see her as someone who chased money or as someone who chased meaning? She found her answer in the stories people shared with her. A mother wrote to say her daughter now dreamed of becoming an engineer because of her example. A man recovering from addiction credited her mentorship program with giving him a second chance at life. A farmer in a drought-stricken region sent photos of his thriving crops, grown thanks to the irrigation system her company provided. Each story reminded her that true success wasn't about numbers, it was about connection. About leaving the world better than you found it. In her quieter moments, she thought about the teller. She wondered if he'd learned anything from that day, if losing his job had forced him to reflect on his actions. She hoped so, not out of bitterness but out of compassion. Everyone makes mistakes, she believed, but growth comes from learning. Maybe he'd gone on to do something meaningful with his life. Or maybe he hadn't. Either way, she chose to forgive him, not for his sake, but for hers. Holding on to anger only weighed her down, and she had too much work to do to carry that burden. When asked during an interview what advice she'd give to others facing similar challenges, she paused before answering. "Don't let anyone make you doubt your worth," she said finally, her voice steady yet soft. "Respect isn't something you earn, it's something you deserve simply by being human. And if someone refuses to give it to you, don't waste your time trying to convince them otherwise. Walk away. Protect your peace. Because when you stand up for yourself, you're not just standing up for you, you're standing up for everyone else who deserves better." Her words resonated deeply, echoing far beyond the room where the interview took place. They reached people sitting alone in dimly lit apartments, scrolling through social media late at night. They reached classrooms filled with students unsure of their place in the world. They reached boardrooms where executives grappled with decisions that would shape the future of their companies. And they reached small towns and big cities alike, planting seeds of hope in hearts that had almost given up. In the end, her legacy wasn't defined by the billions she turned down or the headlines she dominated. It was defined by the lives she changed, the conversation she started, and the world she helped create. A world where respect wasn't negotiable, where equality wasn't aspirational, it was expected, and where courage, even in the face of adversity, could spark movements that lasted lifetimes. And so, though the incident at the bank faded into history, its lessons endured. For her, it was a chapter in a much larger story, a story still being written page by page by everyone brave enough to believe in a better tomorrow.